Okay, cultivating work-life integration. A lot of people call this work-life balance. I don't like balance because if you look on the next slide, I think a lot of times people think of this. We're always trying to balance something. We're not quite sure what we're trying to balance, but this guy's, got work and career and business, performance, responsibility on one side, life, health, family, friends, happiness on the other side. You could add to that list, and whenever you use a balance concept, I'm going to talk about balance, but I'm going to talk about a balance wheel, but a balancing object, it's like I'm going to give equal attention over here than over here. And the reality is, if you're working, you're spending the majority of your time working and then probably sleeping, and then you're splitting the rest among all these other things in your life. So balance isn't quite the right word for me. It's integration. How do you, in a sense, have it all in the right sense of having it all? How do you create an integration of your life? And that's what I want to talk about. So when you think of having an integrated, balanced life yourself, what comes to mind? You try to get an image. So you're living a perfectly integrated, balanced life. What is that? Get a picture in your mind. What does that look like? Get something up there. Here's in the next slide. Here's one person's view of it. Work-life balance is I'm sitting there, by the sea. You're right here looking out at the beautiful Pacific Ocean. You're in your yoga pose, and you're just everything's perfect. You're centered. Everything's in order. Not a lot of tension in your life. And to some extent, you felt some of that even just being here or just standing out there in the sun a few minutes ago and enjoying it. But some of you have a view that it's sad. Or the next slide, more my kind of guy. I'm not in my yoga pose. I'm in my hammock. But it's just the same thing, by the water and the beach and just kind of lying there and, no pressure on me. I'm just... That's just a view of a balance. The problem with that, if you look at the next slide, is that's not the way balance works. Most of us think that balance is what I'd call static equilibrium. And that envision here, this marble at the bottom of this bowl, it's just sitting there. There's no tension. It's static. It's not being pulled one way or the other, not this way or that way. It's just kind of like the guy in the hammock or the gal in her meditation yoga pose. But life is really much more like the bowl over here. You got to turn it up on its lip and put the marble on top of that rounded bowl, and that's called dynamic equilibrium, because all of a sudden, here's what balance is like. It's, what it's like. It's constantly adjusting, right? So whenever you're trying to balance, you're always having to adjust depending upon the things around you. It's a constant motion, which sounds exhausting, and it can be, but you can develop some tools that will speed it up for you. And this dynamic equilibrium becomes frustrating, as you see in the next slide, because you want to love your job, and you all do. You're in a great company, but you also want to love your life. By the way, when I first wrote this book, Achieving Authentic Success, I titled it Make a Life, Not Just a Living. And I actually like that title better because I want people to be intentional about making a life, just like they are about making a living. Problem is it didn't translate internationally, and on top of my acrostics, it was just too much to deal with people on. So Achieving Authentic Success is how we renamed it. But, ideally, you're doing world class on loving your job and loving your life. And that's why the bullseye is up here, at the extreme of both of those. But life... really, it's much more complicated than that. It's not just about loving your life and loving your work. It's, as the next slide shows, my friend Michael, we wrote an article some time ago about work-life integration. I had my buddy Michael say, okay, Michael, create some kind of pose that shows me the conflicts you have with work-life integration. And this was his pose. And if you look at it, it's pretty apt, isn't it? Because our life, it's not just work and play or work and personal life, professional, personal life. There's a whole bunch of things. So here's Michael. He's got his, tennis racket there. He's got his shorts on, but he also has his, work shoes and socks on. He's got something for his small children, little teddy bear, in his briefcase, work and family together. He's got a Bible in his hand, a spiritual life he's dealing with. He doesn't look like a very happy camper. He looks pretty frustrated. And that tends to be the way we are when it comes to having an integrated life. It's like we don't know quite how to make it all work together. And I think one of the best metaphors for it is in this next slide, written by a gentleman who was the vice president of General Motors for a number of years. He said, life is like juggling crystal balls and rubber balls, and success depends upon knowing which is which. My crystal balls are my religion, my faith, my work in this country. Everything else is a rubber ball. You can let it drop, wait for a week or a month, let it bounce. Life is about choices. Life is about balance. So the reality is we all have balls that we're juggling. I mean, it's just kind of a way of life. That's never going to go away. The only question is, which ones do we determine are crystal, and which ones do we determine are rubber? Because the rubber ones can bounce, but the crystal ones can't. They break. And so that's where your values clarification becomes a big issue. And I like what a couple of authors said in our next piece that we put down at some length. I've got 2 slides on this. Robert and Linda Eyre, they wrote a great book on balance. And they say, ask people which means more to them, the approval of strangers or the affection of people closest to them, and they won't be able to understand why you would even ask such a question. Obviously, nothing means more to them than family and their closest friends. Yet how many of us have embarrassed our children or squelched their spontaneity for fear of what neighbors or strangers might think? How often have we poured out our anger on those closest to us because we had a hard day at work? And how many of us have let ourselves become irritable with our family because we were dieting to make ourselves look more attractive to people who do not know us well enough to see beyond the appearances? Good questions. And on the next slide, they go on to say, ask the average person which is more important to him, making money or being devoted to his family, and virtually everyone will answer family without hesitation. But watch how the average person actually lives out his life. See where he really invests his time and energy, and he will give away the fact that he does not really live by what he says that he believes. He has let himself be persuaded that if he leaves for work earlier in the morning and comes home more tired at night, he is proving how devoted he is to his family by expending himself to provide them with the things they have seen advertised. Well, you all get the point. And that's a struggle that we all have. I know you're in a business that supports family, but that's not all that typical. And even with those tensions, you've got to take responsibility yourself to those things that are important. By the way, this is why on the next slide, you see the cover of Fortune magazine some time ago. It said, why do grade A executives get an F as parents? One reason is they become so preoccupied with the work, they lose focus on the family. And they don't have to, we don't have to, we just need to be intentional about all of this. The healthier you are as a person, the more productive you're going to be at work. I want to give you some tools and resources how to do that. So the 2 things I want you to do, and you're going to process this in a minute, are these. The first thing is I want to go back to our earlier discussion about end-of-life questions. And the first thing I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to write your ideal eulogy, okay? Bang, you're dead. How will you be remembered? Except I don't want it to be how you'd be remembered today. I want you to think end of life. Let's imagine that you live to a ripe old, 90 years old, and then you die. How would you like to be eulogized? What would you like people to say about you? So one of the things you can do is get a real clear focus on how you want to be remembered, how you want to be eulogized, what kind of legacy you want to leave. And by the way, I do this all the time in coaching. Then, once you've got clarity around that, you structure your life to get from here to there. It just won't happen. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be deliberate about it. You have to be proactive and focused on it. So at the end of your life, how would you like to be remembered? So one of the things I want you to do in the days to come is write your eulogy. In a few minutes, I'm going to have you take a few minutes and just write down some elements of that. What are the things that are really important to you to be remembered for, ideally at the end of your life? And then you're going to share those again. The second thing I want to do on the next slide is I want to give you a tool to be more intentional about work-life balance or integration. And again, the key, back to our very first discussion, is to focus on completeness and contribution. At the end of the day, how complete is your life? At the end of the day, are you winning in all vital areas of your life? And I'm going to give you some tools to get there. And at the end of your life, how much contribution have you made? And you guys are obviously committed to contribution. That's why you're here. You love doing that. And I know many of you do many things through the company and individually to give back. And that's a phenomenal thing. And you want to continue to be proactive and deliberate about that. I'll never forget going to the Presidential Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. In the U.S., we have this every year. And this was back when Clinton was president, and Al Gore was there. And this is the Washington Hilton. It was just a very powerful group of people. I remember sitting there in one of the tables up toward the front, and here was a chairman of Occidental Oil and Gas, and the president of Canadian Air, and a U.S. ambassador at our table, and all these kind of who's who. I kept thinking, I'm the one who's he among all the who's who, but it was great being there. And what fascinated me was that though there are Supreme Court justices there, and a lot of congressmen, senators there, and ambassadors, and world leaders, there were thousands of people there. Everybody knew who was the most successful person in that room, and it was the speaker. And when Al Gore introduced the speaker, it went on and on and on, and here was Clinton there, his boss and the president, and all these other powerful leaders of industry and international leaders, and yet everybody knew the most successful person there was the speaker. And so Gore just went on and just elevated the speaker. Then the speaker came out. A speaker was not attractive physically. Speaker wasn't dressed in any stylish way. The speaker was fairly short, had to stand on a box to communicate over the lectern. The speaker read the speech poorly. A speaker did a big no-no, and that was went after political issues, jumped into abortion and birth control, alienated the left and the right at the same time. All but a few good Catholics were alienated on one of those levels. And the speaker, though, was just strong as can be, and everybody knew this was the most successful person in that room. Now, why? Who is the speaker? Well, it was Mother Teresa. That's why. So here's a person. Did she have power? Well, not in conventional sense, but in that room, she had more power than anybody there, including the President of the United States. Did she have prestige? Not traditional prestige, but everyone there admired her, wished they had what she had. Did she have position? Yeah, she was a servant in the slums of India, but she had a great position of recognition, prestigious position in the world. Did she have prosperity? She didn't have much money, but she had incredible internal prosperity. Did she have pleasure? I think she was the most joyful person in that whole room. So, but everyone knew she was really the winner. Why? Because she had a life of contribution. Her whole life had been in contribution. Now, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that y'all leave the company and go to the slums of India. But doing what you're doing here is a great thing. But this kind of thing is the kind of thing we ought to be doing as a way of life whenever we can, because contribution is so key. And at the end of the day, that and your winning holistically, completely will be the two issues that really drive you. So let me help you kind of get there by walking you through a 4-step process for life integration. It's 4 simple steps. I do this, by the way, weekly. So number 1, write your own eulogy the days to come so you know what the end game is, what you want, and be intentional about getting there. So that's a long-term process. But short-term, weekly, here's what I do. I do this every Sunday afternoon. I walk through this 4-step process. Number 1, do the balance wheel. Now, here's my balance wheel. I've identified the 7 areas that I want to have integrated in my life every week, by the way. I have to work on a week basis because I want to be intentional. The areas are faith, fitness, family, friends, finances, firm, and fun. Faith is my inner life, however you define that, that's your center. Remember, we were talking about that. Fitness is overall physical, mental, emotional, physical fitness. Family is your family. Friends are the friends in your life, the close people, your intimate relationships. Finances are obvious. Firm is your work, basically. And fun is enjoying the process, recreating routinely. And what I do is I take my wheel here, and then in each slice of the pie, I put an X for where I think I am. I imagine that the hub of the wheel is 1, and 1 means I feel lousy about how I'm doing right now. I just do a gut check. I say, how do I feel about my wheel? And if I'm 1, it means I feel horrible about how I'm doing. I'm not trying to overly think this. I'm just doing a gut check. The rim would be 10. So if I'm out toward the rim, it means I feel fantastic. I'm a mentor. I had to mentor the rest of the world on this. I'm so good. So I do a gut check, and I put an X by where I think I am. Am I a 3? Am I an 8? Am I a 4? And it varies from week to week, by the way, and that's good because I want to adjust from week to week. Then I basically connect those X's. Guy on the next element of the slide, I connect the X's, and it looks like this. So what it helps me to do is to get a sense on what my wheel looks like. Is it thumpity, 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 thumpity? Is it real small? Is everything really small on the inside? Is it small mostly, and one thing, maybe work, I'm feeling really good about, but not so much other areas of my life? But I just do this as a gut check so I can evaluate how I'm doing. And that helps me just to get a visual of, how well my wheel's going, how well I'm balanced. And to me, it's not just work and personal life. To me, work is one of 7. It takes the most time. And I'm not asking, do I feel like I'm expending sufficient time? I'm asking, how do I feel about the health of my involvement in this arena right now? Knowing that work's always going to take the majority of your time if you're working full time. So that's number 1, do the balance wheel, do a gut check, do a self-check. The second thing you do is you list your critical activities. So again, I'm not talking about goals, I'm talking about activities. So I'll take my 7 F's and I'll say, okay, what do I want to do to focus on my faith, depending upon what I just experienced? What do I want to do to work here, to move forward in my inner life and also giving back? I put contribution there. And I'll usually list some kind of activity that I need to do that week that'll move me forward. By the way, I'm always asking these 2 questions on the right, lower right. Where's there been past neglect and where's there present need? If I feel like there's been past neglect in something, I need to make mid-course corrections. If there's present need, I need to make mid-course corrections. So again, what I'm trying to constantly do is run my finger around my soul and determine where I need to make adjustment. And then I'll do the same thing for fitness. I'll say, what do I need to do in fitness? If I haven't been exercising or haven't been getting enough sleep, I'll focus on that and I'll make an adjustment. What about family? I'll try to grapple with, am I spending enough time with my wife? Have I been connecting with my kids? How about my siblings? We have another couple that lives with us. They're extended family for us, and that's part of my evaluation process. And then what about friends? The older Mary and I've gotten, the more we've concluded that, friends are just very precious. So we've for the last 15 years, we've been intentional about those people we want to grow old together with. So we have about 10 couples, that we want to grow old together with. And we do vacations with them. We have dates with them. Most of them are not in San Diego where we live. But developing friendships is a really big deal. With one couple, we have a date every Friday late afternoon, and it's a movie and dinner. Where at that time of life we could do that kind of thing, but they're couple friends, and then we have individual friends. But honing your friends is key. Finances. How am I doing on my finances? What do I need to address? What's falling through the cracks? Maybe on income or insurance or whatever it might be. Firm is, of course, my work profession, and that's where we're going to have most of the work. But there I'll tend to say, what are the 2 or 3 most critical things in my life at work this week? And that'll come there, and I'll create activities around that. So that's number 2. Number 3 is force rank your list. And that's where you say, you've just listed, you probably have under those 5. I'll have at least one thing under every one of these every week, almost without exception. Sometimes I'll have 2, maybe 3 under one of the categories if I felt like there's enough attention needed. But then I might have 10, 12 activities for the week, and I force rank them. So I force myself to say, is that date with my wife more or less important than finishing that product for my work? Or is getting more sleep intentionally this week, upping it, more or less important than dealing with some financial issue? But I'll force myself to force rank them. This is so good because life's all about values clarification. You're always clarifying your values, and all I want you to do is do what you want to do, and to clarify what you want to do, and clarify what's important to you, and then be intentional about it. And so the culture doesn't push you around, your habits don't push you around, but your thoughtful awareness of what you value, your priorities become a primary. So you force rank your list, 1 to say 10 or 12, whatever you have up there, and I'll do that. And then the 4th thing is I schedule my priorities. So this is just an example from this last week from my my Mac calendar, iCal, and I'll simply write in those things that are important to me in order, and I tend to color code them so I know what's more personal, what's more business related, either a nonprofit or a for-profit, what's product related, what's other related. So I'll force rank them, and I simply write those into my schedule. So if it's an activity for the week, I just write them in. And Covey makes a great distinction. He says most of us end up prioritizing our schedule versus scheduling our priorities. And there's a huge difference. You go to work and you've got all these to-dos, all these deadlines that others have given you and you've given yourself, but then you come into work, on Monday, or maybe you do it on the weekend, but you come in and then you try to prioritize all these things that are already given you. Then you go home and you have all these things that are expected from you from other people, and they're giving you a schedule, and then you have to sit there and prioritize your schedule. Instead, Covey, and I think he's right on this, what you want to do is you want to set your priorities and then schedule your priorities, not prioritize your schedule. Otherwise, your habits will drive you, your dysfunctions can drive you, your people around you can drive you, and you want to be sure they're your priorities. Now, obviously at work, you've got certain things you've got to get done, but you just want to own them, so you're doing them joyously and with delight, not out of frustration or because you have to, and that's why going through this process will be very helpful for you. It also allows you to do a classic values clarification. And most of you, have you seen the illustration I like that Covey uses of the jar with big boulders and smaller ones and the sand and the water? If you haven't, his point is he'll bring people up on stage and they have this big old jar, and they'll have sand and water, and they'll have little pebbles, and they'll have big boulders. And he'll say, okay, I want to see how much you can get in the jar, and people will start in with the sand and then put water in, and then the pebbles, and then they can't get on all the big boulders, and then they'll try other scenarios, and what he does is he shows, and they say it can't be done, and then he'll put the big boulders in first, and then he'll stick the pebbles in, which of course go around the big boulders, and then he'll put the sand in, and then he'll put the water in, and he'll show you can get actually all those things inside the big jar, but you've got to start with the big boulders. If you don't get the big boulders in first, which would be your crystal balls, which would be your priorities, if you don't get those in first, they're never going to get in. So all I'm saying is be proactive, be intentional, be focused on those things that will help you to succeed completely, holistically, and help you to contribute to the max as you're working on living out and defining your definition of success. I want to make one more statement, then I want to give you an assignment to work on here together. On the next slide, Rabbi Harold Kushner, who's a great thinker, wrote a book, When Everything You Ever Wanted Wasn't Enough or Isn't Enough. Real good thought leader. he wrote this. He says, what's life about? It's about loving and being loved. It's about enjoying your food and sitting in the sun rather than rushing through lunch and hurrying back to the office. It's about enjoying your food and sitting up in the sun. That came back twice. Anyway, it is about those things. And my point on the right is there's two words in the Greek language for time. One is chronos. The other one is kairos. Chronos is chronology. It's time. So it's a Greek way of thinking about time. It's like this. So that's where we're organized, we're efficient, we're effective, but we're especially efficient. We're doing things really efficiently, intensely, intelligently. Chronos, or kairos, is more of a Hebrew-rooted word, and kairos means the moment. It means buying up the opportunity. And so I'm a big believer at scheduling your priorities and going through this process. By the way, what I just walked you through takes me about maybe 15 to 20 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. That's when I do that, those 4 steps. And I'll put those in my schedule, but the reality is most of my life doesn't happen in my schedule. It happens in the moment, in the kairos, in the opportunity. And so as you're being efficient, again, as has been so well said, you want to be effective. Peter Drucker drove that home years ago. Efficiency is doing things rightly. Effectiveness is doing the right things. And a lot of times the right things aren't things you just schedule. It's in that moment where you stop and encourage someone, or you stop and listen, or you stop and take a nap, or you stop and smell the roses, or you go outside here and enjoy the sun, or you see an opportunity and you respond to the opportunity. It's all about living in the moment, carpe diem concept. And I really buy that, and I think a lot of our life is in that. So be intentional to schedule your priorities, but then live in the moment, enjoy the process as you go through it. Okay? On the next slide, here's the exercise I want you to do. On a piece of paper, and then we'll be done after this. On a piece of paper, you can do it on your notes. How would you like to be remembered? So just jot down a few thoughts. Take about 5 minutes to do both of these. Jot down a few thoughts on how you would like to be remembered. Just outline it. Don't write it as your eulogy, but just, bullet point. Do some bullet points. Spend just a couple minutes brainstorming with yourself on that. And then secondly, I want you to go to that balance wheel and make a little balance wheel and use these 7 F's for now. You can adjust those later. And do your own balance wheel. Based on where you are today, how do you feel today about how you are in the area of faith, fitness, family, friends, finances, firm, and fun? And, remember, the hub is a 1, you feel horrible. The rim is a 10, you feel fantastic. So just put an X on the whatever the location is, and then connect the dots. And then when you're done with that, I'll give you about just a few minutes to do both of those, and we'll have you share again around the tables one more time. Okay?